This is Anthony Metivier, and my passion is helping people use memory palaces to memorize and recall foreign language vocabulary and other stuff too. Welcome to the Magnetic Memory Podcast. I want to talk in this episode about some of the things we do to ruin perfectly good memory palaces after we've built them. And there's actually 5 of them. The first one is not picking an appropriate place for the memory that we're storing in the memory palace. You know, there's a lot of people who think that they can use mnemonics to just locate things anywhere in the void of their mind, as I like to call it. And I don't really argue with these people, because when it comes to memorizing words and phrases and terminology and longer things they're working on, like maybe poems and speeches, it's really important that they just go with whatever works for them. However, you want to make sure that it's actually working for you, because a lot of times it isn't. For example, I once worked with a person who was memorizing Spanish words, and he told me he wanted to remember that vaca means cow, and all he needed to do was simply see a cow vacuuming. And for him, that was a concept that just floated around in the inner space of his mind. And, you know, again, if that works, great. But a few weeks later, I asked him, what's the Spanish word for cow? And it took him about a minute to find this in his mind. And a minute is actually not too bad, but I know it can be better. And it can be better because people who take the time to establish a location, particularly just for V words, as would be taught in the magnetic memory method, they're essentially creating a groove in their mind, a place they know where to go to look for words. It's kind of like dropping a needle on a record. I mean, if you remember records, that is. But a common objection to using this method is, okay, great, but what if I can't remember that the word I'm looking for begins with a V? Well, there isn't a hard-boiled answer to this question, but the magnetic memory method solves it, because you have multiple chances to get at that word as you're using it, because you're using locations and several other techniques and strategies. What I know overall is that merely by making the effort to place the letter in an alphabetically arranged palace in your mind, just like having a memory palace just for V words, your brain has paid attention to that word and done so in a very specific way. You've magnetized that word and given it a special charge, and when the time comes to find and use that word, you're much more likely to be drawn to it because of how you paid attention to it. And you know, this is even if you're memorizing something on the fly. It doesn't have to be foreign language vocabulary. I used to take the train across Germany twice every week for my research, and I was always memorizing the wagon and the seat number on my ticket, so I didn't have to pull it out of my pocket every 5 minutes to make sure I was standing on the right spot on the train platform. So let's say it was wagon 23, seat 92. Since 2 is tin in my memory palace system and 3 is dam, the dam that holds water back, I would see a dam in the shape of a Campbell's soup can bursting at the seams to hold back a river of trains. And I'd make it something like a disaster movie so that the image was large and colorful and really noisy, and actually hear those sounds. And that's pretty good, but I don't want that floating around in the void of my mind. I don't have to do this, but I strengthen this mnemonic by placing it somewhere. Now in this case, I don't put it in a memory palace. I use the train platform itself. I take that image that I've created and I locate it on the platform right in front of me. And this makes the memory so much stronger when I want to recall it. Why? Because I know where to find it. I completely eliminate and destroy, really, any anxiety that this image might be lost. And the takeaway here really is that we ruin our memory palaces and our memorization efforts in general when we don't use locations correctly. And so really, mnemonics, memory strategies, memory tricks, whatever you want to call them, it's a lot like real estate. Location, location, location. And as people who follow my work and my experiments and use my system, the magnetic memory method, to memorize foreign language vocabulary know, is that there's different principles that you can use to maximize the effectiveness of your locations, which have to do with not crossing your own path inside of a memory palace, not trapping yourself, not doing loosey-goosey things like passing through walls as if you were a ghost or jumping off balconies. There's a number of principles like that you can follow that really strengthen the use of locations. And then there's also the matter of how exactly you're going to subdivide stations within the memory palace. Are you going to use single rooms? Are you going to use pieces of things like bookshelves or beds? Or are you going to use the insides of cabinets and so forth? I would call the use of an entire room for just one piece of information a macro station in a memory palace, whereas if you're using elements inside of rooms such as beds, bookshelves, cabinets, and the like, then we would call those micro stations inside of a memory palace. And that's a lot of technical verbiage, but it's incredibly useful when we're trying to get better at mnemonics, especially for storing foreign language vocabulary, which is perhaps one of the best uses of mnemonics and memory palaces. So that was number 5, not picking a place for the memory. And inside of that has to do with not really engineering the memory palace, the journey within it, and understanding the dynamics of how it works, which of course I cover in great detail in the magnetic memory method materials. Now, number 4 is not making the associative imagery large, colorful, and exaggerated when we are creating mnemonics. For a lot of people, this is a really tough nut to crack, and nobody should blame themselves. I myself am a very imaginative person, but I'm not particularly visual in my imagination. I work better with concepts. However, I've trained myself to be more and more and more visual over the years, and all it takes is practice. So the idea that someone is not visual by birth, well, yeah, maybe, but that doesn't mean you have to remain that way. You can certainly develop the skills, and if I can do it, anybody can do it. That's absolutely certain. The funny thing is that I actually, found myself forced to be more visual when I got a research grant to work with the art history department in one of my other careers as a film studies professor. And that's where I got the idea that, when people are working with their memories, they suffer from what I call image deficit disorder. They should spend some time looking at books and large reproductions of art. Go to the art gallery, and you don't have to spend a pile of cash on this stuff. You can just go to the library. You can go to a local gallery. Often there's restaurants you can go to where they feature local artists on the walls. And I'll bet that in your city or your town or wherever you live, there's all kinds of free entrance nights once a month or once a week at the art gallery. So it doesn't have to cost a lot to develop visual skills. And on top of that, you could add drawing as a skill, which also doesn't cost anything, to have a little notebook and just spend a bit of time every day drawing a bit to become more visual. Because this will make your images a lot stronger when you're making mnemonics in your mind, and it will allow you better to make these images brighter and more colorful and more exaggerated, because you have a greater physical and mental association to the images that you're creating and the art of creating images. So when you look at a lot of paintings and art and so forth, you begin to notice the detail. You get to see how they're built and what goes into them, and that creates and develops your imagistic memory or your imagistic abilities, and you can use those to your benefit when you're trying to memorize things. And when you practice the art of drawing, or it could be painting, you're training your hand. And your hand is deeply connected with your mind. So you could even take that skill that you've now built into your hand and pretend in your mind that you're using your hand to draw the associative imagery when you're creating mnemonics to help you remember things. So it's absolutely wonderful practice to become more visual. And when you're doing that, always making sure that the images are large, colorful, and exaggerated. Which leads to point number 3, which is not incorporating action into the associative images. And action is absolutely a crucial element of all memory work using mnemonics. It's not only a means of exaggerating your images, but motion captures the eye, including the mind's eye. And we tend to remember the details of exactly how something happened very, very well. So we need to take advantage of this mental blessing. Now, sometimes readers of mine or students in my video courses, they complain about the fact that I advocate using cartoon violence in mnemonic work. And my answer is always, use whatever works for you. If sunshine and daisies waving in the wind on your front porch remind you that dactylomegaly means an abnormal largeness of fingers and toes, then by all means use it. However, most people will find that enormous daisies with huge muscles bearing hammers, pounding on your toes, making the toes swell into a state of abnormal largeness is much more memorable for something like dactylomegaly. Either way, it's a mistake not to incorporate action into your work, and it's a mistake to not make it extremely exaggerated, or to at least focus deeply in on the action. So if you are going to see daisies waving in the wind, really dial down into what that looks like and focus it and amplify it, make it vivid. It's a wonderful practice to do. And we're going to talk in another episode about how to do this even more in a way that's more easily understood by your brain and natural to do, that doesn't need to have so much cartoon violence. Based on some feedback I've been getting from people, I'm still working through the details, but it's really a controversial a controversial theme in mnemonic work, but it tends to be that for most of us, some sort of cartoon violence works very well. It's the same principle as that need you have to look at a highway car accident. You just are drawn to looking at it because of this kind of action violence that isn't happening at that particular moment. It's already happened, but you're there, drawn and focused to it. Your eyes need to look at it, and we need to have those kinds of images in our mind to help us recall whatever it is that we've memorized. Now, the second major mistake that we do to ruin perfectly good memory palaces is to not revisit and rehearse the material that we've stored there. So when you're thinking about memorizing foreign language vocabulary or terminology, specialized terminology or anything, it's like playing music. Maybe you can get the song merely by looking at the sheet music once, and there's certainly strategies that you can use to memorize sheet music without even actually holding an instrument in your hand. But the chances are that you really need to play that piece of music a dozen times or more to become proficient, and possibly dozens more times to master that song. It all depends a lot on your level of proficiency with your instrument, but in this case, your mind is the instrument. Your memorization techniques are the music stand, and the material that you want to memorize is the music. And don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about repetitive rote learning when I'm talking about revisiting and rehearsing the material that you've stored in your memory palaces. The reason that this isn't rote learning is because the only time you're going to look at the sheet music on your music stand is to test that you've gotten the material that you've memorized right. And this is done very, very simply by just simply, let's say you've memorized 10 foreign language vocabulary words in a memory palace that has 10 stations, and you've kept a record of these using Excel files or written in your notebook, perhaps the same notebook where you're now practicing drawing, and you have a record of these words that you've memorized, but you also have created mnemonics by using a location, by using large exaggerated imagery, and by having vivid action in the image. And now you go back, but without that record even remotely close to you on another piece of paper, you wander through the journey in your mind and you write out all those words that you memorized, solely using your mind as the reference, solely using the mnemonics as the way that you reconstruct these words. And then you go back later and you check the words that you've memorized against the key, the memory key that you've created in an Excel file or a book or whatever. I highly recommend Excel files because you can sort of see a whole memory palace and what you've put there in a single glance. Now, this whole idea of rehearsing and recalling and going through your memory palace and essentially testing yourself is, again, a little bit of a point of controversy because people think, well, mnemonics, I spend time making this crazy image and I should be able to get it back forever and ever and ever, the material I've tried to memorize. But, it's not that simple. You do need to go back and rehearse and recall, and I've created a particular set of ideas that we can't get into in this short podcast, but you can certainly look those things up on www.magneticmemorymethod.com. But the whole point is that you set up yourself a regular rehearsal and recall schedule. And again, you've got a memory key, you've kept a written record of the material that you've memorized, and then without having it nearby, you then test yourself under the same conditions you would have in school. The teacher doesn't let you have an open book test or anything like that. You just have to produce from inside your mind the words that you've memorized by decoding your mnemonic imagery, and then you go back and check it against the record. And this isn't rote learning, and having a written record is not like cheating or anything like that. I'm not too proud to own a security blanket when it comes to something as precious as the material I've memorized, and also I want to become a better memorizer. I want to be much more fluid and capable. So I need to go back, and sometimes when I haven't properly memorized something, I need to go back and think what was wrong with the mnemonic imagery, the associative imagery that I created, and I can troubleshoot those things, but I need to have kept a record of what those were. And so the number one mistake that we make that ruins our memory palaces, perfectly good memory palaces, is working when we're not relaxed. And relaxation is a key component to memorization that no one I've ever read talks about. Maybe it's just a given that, everybody's relaxed and chilled out. But in my experience, talking with readers of my books and some people I've coached, there's so much stress around memorization and memory in general that people really feel apprehensive when they sit down to do mnemonic work. And, so many of us love to claim that we have bad memories. We've turned it into a kind of crutch. We've got learned helplessness around this memory issue. So that when it comes time to memorizing something, we're in a defensive position. We're stressed out about it, and this is not ideal. In fact, it simply won't do. So you, as a person who's using the magnetic memory method, you know already that I talk about the benefits of relaxation and just taking a few minutes to relax before you start memorizing anything. And I talk about particular kinds of breathing exercises, such as pendulum breathing, and I talk about progressive muscle relaxation exercises. These are things you can look up in my materials, or you can just look up in general. And don't skip relaxation. Everything goes faster and smoother when you're relaxed. Your imagination naturally knows how to provide you with the perfect images. It just needs nothing more than a relaxed body to work with. And it also makes traveling through memory palaces that much easier. And the number one best way to see the benefit of relaxation is when you regularly train your memory in a state of relaxation. When it comes time to recall, you've got new foreign language vocabulary, and now the time comes to recall it. If you're regularly relaxed when you're memorizing foreign language vocabulary, you'll find that you automatically fall into that same state of relaxation when you're trying to find the word again to use in a conversation. And of course, you'll also have been practicing recall rehearsal as well, and that will aid that process in addition to falling into that state of relaxation. But I'm really talking about a deep Pavlovian condition. And in another episode, I'll talk about exactly how I came across this idea when I was studying the Russian martial arts Sistema, which I still practice every day, really. It's a beautiful thing. So be relaxed. Be relaxed when you are studying or using memory palaces and mnemonics to memorize foreign language vocabulary. And I said when you're studying, well, just use it in general, studying, working, whatever. Take a little candle, meditate a little, do some pendulum breathing, progressive muscle relaxation. You will be so glad that you did. So that's all for the 5 ways to ruin a perfectly good memory palace on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. Feel free to share this with all your friends, social networks, Facebook, Twitter, likes, all that stuff that people do these days. And, get in touch with me anytime with your questions and ideas. The email is learnandmemorize@zoho.com. That's ZOHO.com. And, of course, you can visit me at www.magneticmemorymethod.com. And before I go, teach someone what you've learned about memorization, memory palaces, or better said, help someone learn about memory palaces and memorization techniques. It's really the best way to deepen the techniques for yourself and make the world a better place as part of the process. This has been Anthony Metivier, founder of the Magnetic Memory Method, a systematic 21st century approach to memorizing foreign language vocabulary in a way that is easy, elegant, effective, and fun.